Hello, my dear friends. If you enjoy this story, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for your support, and now let's begin.
The most awkward introduction of my life did not begin with a handshake. It began around 2 in the morning, when I nudged my husband with my elbow and whispered, "They've started again." Daniel opened one eye. "Who?" I silently pointed toward the wall of our hotel room. "The neighbors." His name was Daniel Harper. He was 44. I was Monica Harper, 41. We lived in Denver and had been married for 15 years. I worked as a design consultant for small restaurants and wine bars. Daniel designed acoustic systems for concert halls, private movie theaters, and expensive home studios. Which made it especially funny to hear him say, "The architect should lose his license for soundproofing like this." We had come to the California coast for a week. It was our first proper vacation alone in 2 years. No kids. No work calls after 8 in the evening. No discussing bills, schedules, or who was taking the car to the mechanic on Monday. We booked a room at a small hotel in Cambria. Only 12 rooms, wooden balconies, a fireplace in the lobby, and the ocean just a few minutes away. The place seemed almost perfect. Until we discovered how clearly we could hear our neighbors. On the first evening, we returned from dinner around 11. I was taking a shower when Daniel knocked on the bathroom door. "Monica." "What?" "Come here." "I'm wet." "That will only improve the dramatic effect." I came out in my robe and found him standing in the middle of the room. He was completely still, listening to the wall. "Are you serious?" "Quiet." At first, I heard a woman laughing. Then a man's voice. Then the bed, or possibly some other piece of furniture, gave fairly convincing evidence that this was not an ordinary conversation. We turned toward each other at exactly the same time. The corner of Daniel's mouth twitched. I broke first. "Don't." "I didn't say anything." "You have the face of a man who's about to perform a technical analysis." I actually could estimate the vibration frequency. I threw a pillow at him. 10 minutes later, something hit the wall again. Daniel lifted his head. "Bed. Go to sleep." "Almost certain." "Daniel." He lay back down. "I'm just doing my job." The next morning, we went downstairs for breakfast. I had almost forgotten about the nighttime concert. Almost. A tall man of about 47 stood beside the coffee machine. He had dark hair with noticeable gray at the temples and the relaxed face of someone who was rarely in a hurry. At the nearest table sat a woman around 43. Short dark blonde hair. A pale linen blouse. She was reading the menu even though breakfast was a buffet. The man turned toward us. "Good morning." Daniel answered first. "Morning." The man poured his coffee and asked with complete innocence, "Did you sleep well?" Daniel's hand froze above the sugar bowl. I lowered my face toward my cup. The woman at the table closed her eyes. It took the man about a second to realize what he had just said. "I meant the mattress." Daniel paused. The mattress was excellent. I could no longer look at anyone. The woman laughed first. Then I gave in. The man shook his head. "I assume the walls are a little thinner than the website suggested." Daniel finally smiled. "I was just planning to leave a very detailed review." "Just not about the acoustics," I said. The woman held out her hand. "Caroline." "Monica." The man introduced himself as Adrian. A moment later, Daniel joined us. That was how we met Adrian and Caroline Blake. They were from Sacramento. Adrian was 47. Caroline was 43. They had been married for 17 years. Caroline restored antique furniture. Adrian was an architect. Daniel particularly enjoyed that last detail. So you're collectively responsible for that wall? Adrian raised both hands. I design office buildings. Convenient excuse. The conversation could have ended there. But later we ran into them again on the beach. A few hours later, in a small wine shop. And that evening they were sitting at the table beside ours in a restaurant. Caroline raised her glass. If we run into each other again tomorrow, we'll have to admit it's fate. Daniel replied. Or the town is so small that none of us has a choice. At the time, we had no idea those accidental meetings were not going to remain accidental. The next day, we agreed to have lunch together. It did not look like the beginning of anything unusual. 4 people around the same age. 2 married couples. Vacation. Ocean. Wine. I liked Caroline almost immediately. There was no need to compete with her for attention. She did not try to be the funniest person at the table. She did not spend 10 minutes telling stories about herself while expecting everyone else to be impressed. She spoke calmly and occasionally added one sentence that made everyone laugh harder than any long story could. Adrian was similar. Reserved. Dryly funny. Observant. Daniel found common ground with him quickly. For the first 20 minutes, they talked about architecture and acoustics. I leaned toward Caroline. They're about to forget we're here. She took a sip of wine. As long as they don't start drawing diagrams. A few minutes later, the conversation moved to travel. Then marriage. Caroline asked. Do you travel alone together very often? I smiled. If Costco counts as a romantic destination, constantly. Daniel shook his head. This is our first vacation without the kids in 2 years. Adrian raised his glass. Then here's to returning to adult life. We clinked glasses. At the next table, a younger couple barely spoke because both were staring at their phones. Caroline noticed them first. Sometimes I think what kills a marriage after 20 years isn't cheating. Adrian turned toward her. This is becoming an uplifting toast. She continued. It's getting used to no longer being curious about the person beside you. This time, nobody joked. Daniel asked. So what saves it? Caroline did not answer immediately. Curiosity. That sentence stayed with me. After lunch, we walked along the shore. The men fell slightly behind. Caroline was quiet for a while. Then she said. I still have to ask. I'm already afraid. Were you laughing much last night? I stopped walking. You really decided to talk about this? No. She paused. But apparently I am. I could not help myself. We tried to behave. Caroline groaned. That's even worse. Why? Because it means you hurt enough to make an effort. I laughed. So did she. A minute later, Caroline became more serious. That morning I wanted to disappear. I would have crawled under the table too. Now it's almost funny. Almost. We kept walking. That was the first time I felt there was a strange closeness between us that should not have existed after only one day of knowing each other. Nothing physical. No direct flirting. We simply knew something about each other that most people would hide even from good friends. That evening, the room next door was quiet. Daniel lay beside me reading something on his phone. After a few minutes, he said. Disappointed? About what? He nodded toward the wall. No show tonight. I can knock and request an encore. Daniel put down his phone. Do you like Adrian? The question sounded too casual. As a person? Very diplomatic. I turned toward him. What about Caroline? He paused for only a second. She's attractive. Now that's honest. You started it. You asked first. Fine. Adrian? I could have joked. For some reason, I did not want to. Yes. He's attractive. Daniel's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not anger. More like a small sting he had not managed to hide. Interesting. Don't ask questions if you don't want the answers. I do want them. He was quiet. I'm just not sure I like the answers. We both smiled. At that point, it was still a game. Just no longer as safe as it had been the day before. On the third evening, Adrian suggested opening a bottle of wine in the hotel courtyard. There were 4 wooden chairs around a small gas fire pit. String lights hung above us. We could hear the ocean beyond the trees. We sat as if we had silently agreed not to complicate anything. I sat beside Daniel. Caroline sat beside Adrian. For the first half hour, everything was completely ordinary. Work. Travel. Funny stories about our children. Then Caroline slowly turned her wine glass between her fingers. Can I ask a very personal question? Daniel replied. After these walls, the concept of privacy has lost most of its value. She laughed. Fair enough. Then she asked. Have you ever talked to each other about other people? Daniel pretended not to understand. Other people in what sense? Adrian looked at him. Very convincing. I decided not to help my husband. Yes. Caroline raised her eyebrows slightly. Just fantasies? Yes. Daniel nodded. Nothing real. I turned the question back on them. Adrian answered first. We've talked about it too. Theoretically? He took a sip. Before this vacation, yes. Daniel slowly set down his glass. That was very carefully worded. Caroline covered her face with one hand. This is why I wanted to do the talking. Adrian shrugged. I just shortened the route. The conversation was gradually becoming less of a joke. A few minutes earlier, we had been discussing fantasies in general. Now we were talking about the 4 of us. Caroline asked. Does this make you uncomfortable? I answered honestly. A little. Because of us? Because it's real. She waited. Fantasy is easy when the people only exist in your head. Daniel quietly added. And these people live through the wall. Adrian smiled. And tomorrow they'll be sitting beside you at breakfast. That eased some of the tension. But not the subject. Daniel asked. Have you ever actually tried anything like this? Adrian shook his head. Not with another couple. I caught the qualification. Not with a couple? Caroline smiled. We both had lives before marriage. Fair answer. She asked. What about you? No, I said. Daniel confirmed. Only conversations. A pause settled over the group. Adrian ran a hand along his jaw. Then maybe it's better to say this directly. Daniel exhaled. I'm already starting to miss the architecture discussion. Adrian ignored the joke. Caroline and I have talked about you. I felt everything inside me tighten into one point. Caroline lightly touched her husband's elbow. Don't make it sound like a presentation to the board. Adrian continued more gently. We like you. I asked. Both of us? Both. Daniel did not smile. And what happens now? Caroline answered before her husband. Nothing, if you don't want anything to happen. Adrian nodded. We're not asking you to decide right now. Caroline looked at me. We just don't want to spend the next few days pretending none of us notices what's happening. Nobody argued. After that, the tension could no longer be blamed on wine, vacation, or a strange accidental friendship. It existed. And now all four of us had admitted it. The next morning, I woke before Daniel. It was around 7. I took my coffee and went out onto the balcony. The air was cool. The ocean was barely visible through the morning haze. A minute later, the neighboring balcony door opened. Adrian stepped outside holding a mug. We both stopped. He raised his coffee in greeting. The architect of this hotel clearly did not value personal space. A wooden divider about shoulder height separated our balconies. It created the impression of privacy without actually providing much of it. At least the walls out here don't talk. Adrian smiled. Everything okay after last night? I leaned against the railing. Yes. You answered too slowly. Because the definition of okay has become pretty broad over the last 3 days. He laughed. Then his tone became more serious. We don't want you to feel pressured. I don't. Good. For a few seconds, we watched the ocean. Adrian said. I like Daniel. That's an unexpected confession. I'm serious. I like him too. That makes things easier. I turned toward him. Why? Because if I didn't like your husband, the whole idea would be a bad one. I understood. Nobody was trying to take someone else's spouse away. There was no competition between the men. No secret negotiations. That somehow made the situation calmer and stranger at the same time. Adrian took another sip of coffee. And I like you. Heat rose into my face. That part is slightly less neutral. Yes. At that moment, our balcony door opened. Daniel stepped outside. He took in the scene in 1 second. Me with coffee. Adrian with coffee. A symbolic divider between us. Excellent. I raised an eyebrow. What exactly? My wife is talking to the attractive neighbor on the balcony at 7 in the morning. Adrian said. We're discussing architecture. Daniel nodded. Of course. Later, at breakfast, Caroline leaned toward me. Was he flirting? You're asking about your own husband? That's exactly why I'm interested. A little. She nodded with satisfaction. Good. I nearly dropped my fork. Good? If he suddenly turned into a wooden statue, tonight would be even stranger. Daniel only heard the last part. What tonight? I answered. We're discussing furniture. Caroline barely managed to keep a straight face. That day, we decided to spend some time apart. I thought distance might help us sort out what we were thinking. It did not. Daniel and I drove along the coast. We stopped at an overlook and sat for a long time on a bench above the ocean. He did not avoid the subject. Do you want to try? I looked at the water. I want to understand what exactly we're talking about trying first. That isn't really an answer. Because I don't have one yet. He nodded. Neither do I. I turned toward him. Does it scare you that I like Adrian? This time Daniel did not hide behind a joke. Yes. The answer came faster and more honestly than I expected. He continued. And at the same time, I'm curious to see you around him. Wonderful. I smiled. A very convenient combination of emotions. I never claimed it was convenient. I asked. Do you like Caroline? Yes. The sting of jealousy was noticeably stronger this time. Daniel felt my fingers tighten around his. Do you want to stop all of this? I genuinely considered it. It would have been the easiest option. Go back to the hotel. Spend the remaining days politely. Never mention the subject again. No. Daniel said nothing, but after that, the conversation could no longer be turned back into a joke. That evening, we met again in the courtyard. This time, it was not accidental. Adrian brought wine. Caroline brought cheese, grapes, and nuts. Daniel and I arrived last. Caroline was wearing a dark blue dress. Beautiful. Elegant. Dressy enough that nobody could pretend this was just another casual evening after the beach. Daniel noticed her immediately. I noticed his reaction. He noticed mine. Caroline caught both of us. What? Nothing, I said. You're a terrible liar. We sat down. For the first few minutes, we talked about everything except the reason we were there. Finally, Adrian had enough. We can spend another 3 hours discussing restaurants. Daniel raised his glass. Excellent topic. Or we can admit why we're here. This time, nobody laughed. I set down my glass. If we're going any further, I need rules. Caroline immediately became serious. Go ahead. Nobody agrees to anything for their spouse. Daniel listened closely. If someone does this only because they're afraid of disappointing the other person, we stop here. Adrian nodded. Agreed. Second, any of us can stop at any point. Caroline added. Without having to explain immediately. Yes. Daniel said. And nobody disappears in the morning. I turned toward him. That rule sounds like you already suspect someone. We live through the wall. Disappearing would be technically difficult. Adrian smiled. Caroline raised one finger. I have another one. We all looked at her. Tonight, everyone ends the night with their own spouse. She briefly took Adrian's hand. I need to wake up beside him. I looked at Daniel. So do I. The rules did not remove the nerves. But they gave them a shape. After that, the conversation stopped being a game. Daniel admitted he was afraid of seeing a reaction in me that he might never be able to forget. Caroline was afraid of comparisons. Adrian feared that friendliness would turn into cold silence the next morning. My biggest fear was discovering that jealousy would be stronger than curiosity. Caroline sighed. I imagined myself being much braver. I thought you were the bravest one here. That was advertising. Adrian asked me. Are you afraid of me? No. I nodded toward his wife. I'm more afraid of Caroline. She looked surprised. Why me? Because my husband likes you. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Caroline did not turn it into a joke. And I'm scared because Adrian likes you. That was enough for me. Until then, she had seemed like the woman confidently leading all of us into an experiment. Now I saw a wife who also had something to lose. We were not competing. We were both taking a risk. When it became cold outside, we moved into their room. 4 wine glasses on the table. Quiet music. No carefully prepared romantic atmosphere. Nobody knew who was supposed to do what first. That awkwardness was almost a relief. Caroline sat beside Daniel. Adrian ended up near me. My husband met my eyes. I did not pretend to be completely confident. I simply gave him a small nod. Adrian gently touched my hand. Everything okay? So far. Caroline snorted. Incredibly romantic. Some of the tension disappeared. What followed was far less smooth than the fantasies people create in advance. There were pauses. Awkward questions. Moments when someone checked their spouse's reaction. Sometimes one of us started laughing at exactly the moment things were becoming too serious. Nobody transformed into a different person. And I think that was what helped. Everything happened between four adults who never forgot that the most valuable thing in the room was not the experiment. It was the relationships each of us had brought into that room. I woke the next morning beside Daniel. He was lying on his back staring at the ceiling. Been awake long? About 10 minutes. And you've already had time to regret your entire life? So far, just the choice of hotel. What are you actually thinking about? He turned his head. Now the people behind that wall are people we know far too well. That was already true after the first night. The level of information has increased considerably. I moved closer. Do you regret it? He did not answer automatically. I liked that he actually considered the question. No. Neither do I. That did not mean the jealousy had vanished. Or the awkwardness. Or the questions. There simply was no regret. At breakfast, it became obvious that the morning would be harder than the night before. We were sitting together again. The same coffee machine. The same croissants. The same waiter. But now even passing the sugar felt strangely significant. Adrian broke the silence first. He looked at Daniel. So, how was the mattress? I covered my face with my hand. Caroline smacked her husband with a napkin. Daniel nearly spilled his coffee. A minute later, we were talking again. Not exactly the way we had before. But normally enough that nobody wanted to escape. Caroline quietly asked me. You okay? Yes. Really? Really? I asked her the same question. She slowly nodded. I was jealous. So was I. Badly? A couple of times, yes. Daniel overheard us. Excellent. This morning is becoming more relaxing by the minute. Adrian shrugged. The important thing is that the men were completely calm. Daniel turned toward him. I mentally hated you for about 4 minutes. Adrian pretended to calculate. I had about 7. This time, the laughter was not hiding the problem. It simply proved that we could talk about it. The jealousy had not disappeared. But it had not become proof that we had made a mistake. It only reminded us that our marriages had remained at the center of everything the whole time. That afternoon, we went our separate ways again. Daniel and I walked along the water for a long time. Eventually, he asked. So what now? What exactly? Are we turning this into a new tradition? Have you already opened a calendar? Mentally. I stopped. No. He stopped too. No forever? I don't know. I took his hand. But I definitely don't want one unusual evening to become a new obligation. Daniel nodded. Agreed. And I'm still glad it happened. So am I. That evening, the 4 of us went to a small restaurant by the ocean. Caroline wore jeans and a sweater. Adrian argued with the waiter about the wine. Daniel told a story about a disastrous business trip. Nobody suggested repeating the previous night. And that unexpectedly reassured me. We did not have to immediately give what had happened a name. We did not have to decide what kind of people we had suddenly become. One evening was enough. 2 days later, we were leaving. Caroline hugged me beside the car. Are we going to stay in touch? Disappearing after this would be a little too theatrical. Adrian shook Daniel's hand. A second later, they hugged anyway. Daniel said. Next time, book a room farther away. Adrian replied. Would 1 room between us be enough? Minimum 2. On the drive home, Daniel asked. Do you think we'll see them again? I looked in the mirror at the little hotel disappearing around the bend. Probably. And what happens then? I don't know. Strangely, I like that answer now. About 2 weeks later, we did see them again. An ordinary dinner. Wine. Conversation about work. No proposals. Nobody tried to turn the trip into an agreement or a lifestyle. And maybe that was exactly why it remained a good memory instead of becoming a problem. I still sometimes think about that first night and Adrian's completely ridiculous question at breakfast. If the hotel walls had been thicker, we probably would have passed each other without a second thought and never discovered where one awkward conversation could lead. But the most unexpected part was not what happened between four people. It was coming home with the feeling that I knew my own husband a little better than I had before the trip. I saw him jealous, curious, uncertain, interested in what was happening and at the same time frightened by his own reaction. He saw much the same in me. Both of us had to give up the comfortable illusion that after 15 years, we already knew absolutely everything about each other. We do not. We probably never will. And now that does not frighten me. Before that trip, all of this existed only in conversations that could easily end with a joke. At the hotel, the joke became a real possibility for the first time, and the decision was something we made together. So what stayed with me mattered more than the experiment itself. Neither of us had to hide from the other what we wanted or what we were afraid of. Monica and Daniel came to the coast for an ordinary vacation together. Thin hotel walls introduced them to Adrian and Caroline far more intimately than neighboring guests would normally meet. But the real challenge was not the flirting or the invitation to spend an evening together. They had to admit their curiosity, jealousy, and fear of crossing a line after which their relationships might never feel quite the same. Do you think an experience like this can make a stable marriage stronger, or is the risk simply too great? And who would make such an experiment psychologically harder, a mature couple you already know, or people you know you will never see again?